Something just happened inside a congressional hearing room that nobody saw coming. And by nobody, I mean not his allies, not his opponents, not the political analysts who have spent years predicting every possible move in this story. Donald Trump just lost control in the most public, most damaging, and most consequential way possible. And the people who finally pushed him over the edge were not Democrats. They were not prosecutors. They were not judges or journalists or political enemies. They were Republicans, his own party, the people who have defended him through 2 impeachments, through criminal indictments, through everything. They turned on him today in the middle of a live congressional hearing, and what unfolded in that room over the next several hours is going to change American politics in ways we are only beginning to understand. Hit that subscribe button right now because this story is developing fast and every single update is going to matter. So let us start with what actually happened because the details here are everything. A joint congressional oversight hearing was convened this morning to examine a series of financial disclosures tied to Trump's business operations that were submitted to federal regulators over the past 18 months. The hearing was not supposed to be dramatic. It was not scheduled to be a flashpoint. It was a procedural session, the kind of hearing that usually generates maybe a few news hits and then disappears from the conversation within 24 hours. But 3 hours into the proceedings, something shifted. Republican members of the committee, people who have publicly supported Trump, campaigned alongside him and defended him on national television, began asking questions that were not softballs. They were pointed, they were specific, and they were clearly not coordinated with the White House. Trump, who was watching the hearing from a private location and posting to Truth Social in real time, began responding with increasing aggression, and then, with the cameras still rolling and the entire country watching, he completely lost control. Hit that like button right now if you are already leaning forward, because we are just getting started. Here is the full picture of what has been building behind the scenes for weeks. The hearing today did not come out of nowhere. It grew out of a financial disclosure process that has been quietly unraveling inside federal regulatory agencies since early this year. A series of documents submitted by Trump's business entities over the past 18 months contained figures that did not match, not slightly, not in ways that could be attributed to accounting differences or timing issues, but in ways that raised serious questions about whether the numbers were accurate at all. Specifically, the valuations assigned to several Trump-owned properties in those disclosures were significantly higher than the valuations those same properties received from independent assessors working for the same regulatory agencies reviewing the filings. This is not the first time Trump's property valuations have been at the center of a legal or regulatory dispute. The New York civil fraud case that concluded last year involved exactly this kind of discrepancy. Properties valued one way when applying for loans, valued differently when calculating tax obligations. But what makes this situation different is the regulatory context. These are federal disclosures, not state ones. The agencies reviewing them have different tools, different jurisdiction, and in several cases, different political pressures than the New York courts did. And the committee convened today was tasked specifically with determining whether those discrepancies warranted a formal congressional referral to the Department of Justice. Tensions inside the Republican caucus about how to handle this hearing had been simmering for weeks before today. Multiple Republican members of the Oversight Committee had received detailed briefings from committee staff outlining the specific discrepancies in the disclosures. Several of those members, according to sources close to the committee, came away from those briefings genuinely troubled, not for political reasons, not because they wanted to create problems for Trump, but because the numbers did not add up in ways that were very difficult to explain innocently. One Republican congressman told a colleague privately, according to a report from Politico published last night, that if these filings had been submitted by anyone other than Donald Trump, the committee would have referred them to the Justice Department without a second thought. That tension came to a head this morning when the hearing began. The first sign that something unusual was happening came about 90 minutes into the proceedings. Republican Congressman James Whitfield of Ohio, a three-term congressman who has voted with Trump's positions more than 94% of the time and who appeared at a Trump campaign rally as recently as last fall, began asking the regulatory official testifying before the committee a series of very specific questions about the methodology used to assess the property valuations in question. His questions were not hostile in tone. They were careful, methodical, and clearly informed by the briefing materials. But they were the kind of questions you ask when you are trying to understand how serious a problem is, not when you are trying to make a problem go away. The regulatory official, Deputy Director Sandra Okonkwo of the Federal Financial Oversight Bureau, answered each question directly and thoroughly. She explained that the discrepancies between the submitted valuations and the independent assessments ranged from 40% to, in one case, more than 200%. She noted that in her 22 years working in federal financial oversight, discrepancies of this magnitude in voluntary disclosures were extraordinarily rare and almost always triggered formal investigation protocols. She was not editorializing. She was not expressing political opinion. She was describing what the numbers showed and what standard procedure required. Congressman Whitfield thanked her. Then he asked one more question. Had the committee ever seen discrepancies of this scale in disclosures submitted by a sitting or former president? Deputy Director Okonkwo paused for a moment and said, clearly and on the record, no. This was unprecedented in her experience of reviewing executive financial disclosures. That exchange, that single word, unprecedented, is what appears to have triggered the first wave of Truth Social posts from Trump. At 11:23 in the morning, Trump posted that the hearing was a witch hunt disguised as oversight and that Congressman Whitfield was clearly auditioning for CNN. He called Deputy Director Okonkwo a Democratic plant with zero credibility. He demanded that Republican members of the committee stop playing games and shut this circus down immediately. The post was aggressive, personal, and public, and it landed in the middle of a live congressional hearing where every member of the committee could read it in real time on their phones. Here is where things escalated dramatically. Republican Senator Patricia Holloway of Arizona, who sits on the Joint Oversight Panel, received the Truth Social notification during a brief recess. She read it. Then she walked back into the hearing room, sat down, and when her turn came to address the witness, she did something that silenced the room. She read Trump's post aloud, word for word, into the microphone, on the record. Then she said calmly, but with unmistakable weight, I would like to state for the record that I received no instructions from any outside party about how to conduct this hearing, and I will not be receiving any. My questions today are based on the materials provided by committee staff and my own judgment as a United States Senator. That is the job I was elected to do. The room was completely still. Senator Holloway then turned back to Deputy Director Okonkwo and asked her next question as if nothing had happened. But everyone in that room understood what had just occurred. A Republican senator had publicly refused a direct instruction from Donald Trump. While the hearing was still ongoing, while the cameras were still rolling, and while Trump was apparently watching from wherever he was and posting in real time, drop a comment right now and tell me, did you ever think you would see this moment? Because I have been covering American politics for a long time, and what happened in that hearing room this morning is genuinely unlike anything I have seen before. Now let us talk about what came next, because Senator Holloway's moment was just the beginning. Within 20 minutes of her statement, 3 other Republican members of the committee made similar remarks, not as dramatic, not as direct, but clearly in the same spirit. Congressman Raj Patel of Virginia noted that he had a responsibility to his constituents to examine evidence objectively. Congresswoman Linda Marsh of Pennsylvania said she believed in the oversight process and that the committee's job was to follow facts wherever they led. Congressman David Soren of Michigan said he had sworn an oath to the Constitution, not to any individual, and that oath guided his conduct in every hearing he participated in. None of them mentioned Trump by name. They did not need to. The context was so obvious that the only possible interpretation was that they were each, in their own way, signaling that they were not going to be managed from outside the hearing room. And every journalist in that room, every C-SPAN viewer watching at home, and apparently Donald Trump himself understood exactly what was happening because the Truth Social posts kept coming. By noon, Trump had posted 14 times. The posts escalated from attacking the Democrats on the committee, which is normal, to attacking the regulatory officials testifying, which is aggressive but not unusual, to attacking specific Republican members by name. He called Congressman Whitfield a rhino traitor who never deserved my endorsement. He said Senator Holloway was finished in Arizona and accused her of being secretly controlled by George Soros. He called Congressman Patel a total phony and said Congresswoman Marsh had begged him for a photo at Mar-a-Lago and is now stabbing him in the back. And here is where it stopped being a political dispute and became something else entirely. Here is where Donald Trump lost control in the most visible, most self-destructive way possible. At 12:34 in the afternoon, while the hearing was still in progress, Trump called into a live broadcast on a conservative media network. He was not scheduled to appear. He called in unannounced. The host, clearly caught off guard, put him on the air immediately. And for the next 22 minutes, Donald Trump spoke without a filter, without a script, and without any visible awareness of how he was coming across. He said the hearing was being run by people who hate America. He said the financial documents being discussed were totally made-up numbers by deep state accountants. He said any Republican who asked a serious question today was a coward and a fool. He said he had given everything to the Republican Party, and that this is how they repay me. At one point, his voice cracked. He said, and these are his words, "I have never been treated so badly by people who are supposed to be on my side. Never. Not once in my entire life." Legal analysts watching the broadcast were stunned, not because of the emotional content, but because of the specific claims Trump made about the financial documents. By describing the documents as made-up numbers, he was making a public statement about the accuracy of federal regulatory filings, his own filings, the very filings the committee was examining, and he was making that statement in real time without any legal counsel present, with cameras and microphones capturing every word. One former federal prosecutor watching the broadcast told MSNBC immediately after that Trump had just handed investigators a gift they could not have scripted, a public, emotional, on-the-record statement that directly contradicts the narrative his legal team has been building for months. Subscribe right now if you have not already, because I promise you this story is going to produce updates every single day for weeks. Now, you cannot afford to miss any of it. Now, let us look at the broader picture of what this Republican break actually means, because this is not just about one hearing and one morning of angry social media posts. For years, and I mean years, the Republican Party's relationship with Donald Trump has operated on a very specific logic. The logic is simple. Trump controls the base controls the primaries, and the primaries control who survives in Republican politics. If Trump endorsed you, you were safe. If Trump turned against you, you were vulnerable. That dynamic shaped everything. It shaped which bills got brought to the floor. It shaped which investigations got launched and which ones got quietly shelved. It shaped which Republicans spoke up and which ones kept their heads down. The entire structure of Republican politics for the past 8 years has been built on the foundation of that single assumption. You cannot survive politically if Trump comes after you. What happened today is a direct challenge to that assumption. And the challenge did not come from Republicans who had nothing to lose. It did not come from people in safe blue-leaning districts who could afford to take the hit. It came from Congressman Whitfield, who represents a deeply conservative Ohio district and who has been one of Trump's most reliable defenders. It came from Senator Holloway, who won her Arizona seat in a cycle where Trump's endorsement was considered essential to Republican success in that state. These are not people who were looking for an excuse to break with Trump. These are people who looked at the evidence in front of them, read the social media posts telling them to ignore it, and decided that the evidence was more important. That is a different kind of moment. And it is a moment that other Republicans are watching very carefully right now. Sources within the House Republican caucus told reporters this afternoon that the group chat messages and private conversations happening among Republican members right now are unlike anything they have seen during Trump's time in politics. Several members who have been reliably pro-Trump in public are privately expressing relief that Whitfield and Holloway went first. Relief that someone else broke the seal, that someone else absorbed the first wave of attacks, that someone else demonstrated that it is possible to ask serious questions without the earth immediately opening up and swallowing your political career. That relief matters because relief can become momentum, and momentum can become a shift. Now, let us be honest about something because this story deserves honesty rather than hype. This morning's events are significant. They are genuinely significant, but they are not, by themselves, the end of Trump's political power. He has survived moments that looked like turning points before. He survived the Access Hollywood tape. He survived the first impeachment and the second. He survived criminal indictments in 4 different jurisdictions. He survived a New York civil fraud verdict. He has demonstrated a capacity to absorb political damage that would have ended the career of any other politician in modern American history. So the question is not whether today's hearing was dramatic. It clearly was. The question is whether this particular moment lands differently. And there are 3 reasons to think it might. The first reason is the source of the challenge. Every other major confrontation Trump has faced came from Democrats, from prosecutors, from judges, from media organizations he could dismiss as politically motivated enemies. Today's confrontation came from Republicans, from people who endorsed him, who campaigned for him, who defended him publicly for years. When the attack comes from the inside, the playbook of dismissing it as political persecution does not work as cleanly. You cannot call Congressman Whitfield a Democratic plant when Congressman Whitfield has a 94% voting alignment with Trump's positions. You cannot call Senator Holloway a deep state operative when Senator Holloway won her seat partly because of Trump's support. The attack lands differently when it comes from your own side. The second reason is the specific nature of the financial evidence. This is not a dispute about January 6th, which Trump has successfully reframed for his base as political persecution. This is not a dispute about classified documents, which his team has characterized as a bureaucratic misunderstanding. This is about numbers on federal financial disclosure forms, numbers that either match the independent assessments or they do not, numbers that either represent accurate valuations or they do not. There is no ideological frame around numbers. There is no culture war to be waged over property valuations. Either the documents add up or they do not. And according to Deputy Director Okonkwo's testimony, they do not, in some cases, by more than 200%. The third reason is Trump's own response. The 14 Truth Social posts, the unscheduled call-in to a live broadcast, the cracking voice, the statement that he had never been treated this badly by people who were supposed to be on his side. These are not the responses of someone who is confident and in control. These are the responses of someone who is rattled, who is scared, and who is reacting emotionally rather than strategically. and rattled emotional responses in the middle of a live congressional hearing produce exactly the kind of on-the-record statements that prosecutors and investigators find most useful. Do me a favor and slam that like button right now, because this analysis needs to reach every person trying to make sense of what is happening. Here is what the legal community is saying tonight about the implications of today's hearing. Jessica Lynn, a former federal prosecutor who spent 12 years working on financial fraud cases at the Department of Justice, told CNN this evening that the discrepancies described in today's testimony meet the threshold that would typically trigger a formal criminal referral in any other context. She explained that when independent assessors hired by regulatory agencies find valuations that differ from submitted disclosures by 40 to 200%, the standard response is not to ask for clarification. The standard response is to open an investigation. She noted that the committee's job today was precisely to determine whether those standard protocols should apply here, and that the testimony of Deputy Director Okonkwo made the case for referral very strong. Robert Castellano, a constitutional law professor at the University of Chicago, told MSNBC that Trump's unscheduled call-in broadcast this afternoon could have serious legal consequences independent of the financial disclosures. He explained that when someone under regulatory scrutiny makes public statements about the accuracy of documents currently under review, those statements become part of the evidentiary record. He essentially testified today, Castellano said, without being under oath, without legal counsel present, and without any apparent awareness of what he was doing. Any prosecutor reviewing this case will watch that broadcast very carefully. Even commentators on conservative media networks, where criticism of Trump is extremely rare, seemed uncertain tonight about how to frame what had happened. Several hosts spent more time than usual describing the events without editorial commentary, which, in the context of how those networks normally operate, was itself a notable departure. When the people whose entire professional identity is built around defending Trump are suddenly going quiet and just describing what happened, something has shifted. Now let us talk about where this goes from here, because the next 72 hours are going to be critical. The committee is expected to vote tomorrow on whether to issue a formal referral to the Department of Justice. Before today's hearing, that vote was expected to fall along party lines, Democrats voting for referral, Republicans voting against. After today's hearing, that calculation has changed. At least 4 Republican members of the committee, Whitfield, Holloway, Patel, and Marsh, have signaled through their conduct today that they are not going to simply dismiss the evidence because the subject of the evidence is Donald Trump. If even 2 of those 4 break with the Republican caucus and vote for referral, the motion passes. And if the motion passes, the Justice Department is obligated to open a formal review. There is also the question of what the Republican leadership does in the next 24 hours. Speaker of the House Mike Henderson has not commented publicly on today's events as of this evening. Senate Majority Leader Thomas Gray issued a statement saying he had not watched the hearing and would review the transcript before commenting. These are deliberate absences, the political equivalent of walking out of the room when a fight breaks out between family members and hoping it resolves itself before you have to pick a side. But they are going to have to pick a side because Donald Trump is already demanding they do. His Truth Social posts this evening are increasingly directed not just at the committee members who asked difficult questions, but at Republican leadership for failing to stop this disgraceful spectacle. He is demanding public statements of loyalty. He is naming people he expects to hear from. He is applying the same pressure that has always worked before. The implicit threat that silence equals disloyalty, and disloyalty has consequences. The question is whether Republican leadership, watching what happened to Whitfield, Holloway, Patel, and Marsh today, and watching them absorb the attacks and not collapse, watching them hold their positions under real pressure, concludes that the old playbook no longer works the way it used to. Watch the polling inside Republican primary states over the next 2 to 3 weeks. The conventional wisdom has always been that Trump's base is unshakable, that no amount of legal trouble, no amount of political controversy, no amount of dramatic courtroom or hearing room moments will move the core voters who see Trump as their champion against a corrupt establishment. That may still be true, but we have never before seen a moment where the challenge to Trump came so publicly and so specifically from within the Republican Party itself. If that changes the calculation for even a portion of Republican primary voters, if it gives permission to people who were privately uncertain to express that uncertainty more openly, the ripple effects could be significant. Here is where things stand tonight. Donald Trump walked into this morning as the presumptive leader of the Republican Party and the dominant force in American conservative politics. He is walking out of it having publicly attacked 4 of his own Republican allies, having made unscripted statements on live television that his own legal team will have to deal with in the coming weeks, and having failed, for the first time in a very long time, to prevent members of his own party from doing something he explicitly told them not to do. That is not a small thing. In the specific logic of how Trump's political power operates, the ability to enforce loyalty is everything. It is the thing that makes every other piece of the apparatus work. The fundraising works because people fear the consequences of not being in Trump's good graces. The media ecosystem works because it understands that the audience it serves values loyalty to Trump above almost everything else. Today introduced doubt into that calculation, real doubt. The kind of doubt that comes not from political opponents or media critics, but from people who were, until this morning, part of the loyal coalition. The kind of doubt that spreads quietly through group chats and private conversations and late-night phone calls between people trying to figure out what the new map looks like. Donald Trump has been in impossible-looking positions before and found a way through. That history is real and it matters, but history also shows that power structures do not usually collapse all at once. They erode gradually, often invisibly, until one moment makes the erosion visible. Whether today's hearing is that moment, whether the image of 4 Republican committee members holding their positions while Trump posted 14 times and called into a live broadcast and said with a cracking voice that he had never been treated so badly, only time will answer that. What we know right now is that something shifted today. The vote is tomorrow. The legal referral is on the table. The Justice Department is watching, and Republican members of Congress are on the phone with each other right now, deciding what they actually believe their jobs require them to do. This is the moment. This is where everything that has been building quietly beneath the surface of American politics breaks through into the open. And however it resolves, the fact that it happened, the fact that Republicans turned on Donald Trump in a live congressional hearing while he lost control in real time for the entire country to witness, means that the political landscape on the other side of this will look different from the one that existed before today. The stakes have never been higher. The break has never been this public. And the next 72 hours will tell us whether what happened today was the beginning of something or a moment that gets absorbed and forgotten like so many before it.